today's seminar, Liberating Zarathustra's Relevance. I will talk for about half an hour, and then I'll use the remaining half hour to answer your questions. So if you want to write your questions on the little chat feature, I will be able to read them and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, good. I'd like to start with a brief introduction, which applies to all sessions of this seminar. First, why do I think Zarathustra's teachings need to be liberated? Liberated from what? Well, for more than 1,000 years, Zoroastrians have lived under various dominant cultures, religions, languages other than Avestan, and these influences have molded our thinking in ways that are often quite different from the Gathas and even from later texts. So in these 7 sessions, I would like to explore with you a few of these areas in order to liberate Zarathustra's teachings from these later influences, because I think you will find that they make a real difference in the way we live our lives and view other people, other life forms, and the environment. In these sessions, I will give you only a few highlights with no references, but I will also give you quotations from Zarathustra's own words and from some later texts. How do I get out of this screen? I'd like to see everyone.
You want to see everyone?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sharing your speech, so that's why you can't see everyone. I would prefer
not. I would prefer not.
Okay. All right. Hold on then. Now I need. Okay. Hold on. Just go ahead. I will.
If anyone wants a copy of the speech, just email me and I'll send you a PDF copy.
Okay. Sasanjan, I need your help here.
Please.
Okay, we want to see Dina only.
Okay, then make me co-host.
No, not me only, everybody.
Everybody? Okay, yeah. Some people don't want, some people are behind the black screen.
That's okay, but anyone whose video is on, I'd like to see you. Because it's hard to talk just to a computer. I'd much rather talk to people's faces. Like
okay, I'm going to put the gallery view, so now you can see everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so in these 7 sessions, I'd like to explore with you a few of these areas in order to liberate Zarathustra's teachings from these later influences, because I think you will find they make a real difference in how we live our lives, relate to other people, other life forms, and the environment. In these sessions, I will give you only a few highlights with no references, but I will also give you quotations from Zarathustra's own words and also from some later texts, so you can decide for yourself whether you or not you agree with my conclusions. If you want references and more details, they are laid out in various chapters on my website, which are footnoted in the written copies of these talks. And if any of you would like to receive a written copy, just email me and I'll send it to you. The translation of the Gathas that I will be using is mostly that of the late Professor Insler of Yale University. But now that I've been studying the Avestan language for some years, I realized that even Insler, like many translators, sometimes translates a given word or phrase in an interpretive way, injecting into Zarathustra's thoughts, ideas and mindsets and other religious paradigms. So in a quotation from the Gathas, I may put in square brackets and black font my own translation of an Avestan word based on linguistically acceptable standards. Finally, I have arranged the order of these sessions so that the ideas in the earlier sessions will be helpful in understanding the ideas in the later sessions, how they all fall into place like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And that includes the ideas in this first session, which is entitled Gender Equality and Social Justice. And here let me take a moment to express my admiration for the young Zoroastrians who wrote articles in the CZC's latest journal, Cheharanama, about social justice in our times. Their articles took a lot of courage and integrity, and I convey my sincere respect and admiration. The Gathas contain specific evidence of both gender equality and what today we call social justice. This evidence is corroborated by later Avestan texts, by archaeological evidence, as well as by the legends of ancient Iran recounted in the Shahnameh. In the Gathas, there are many instances in which Zarathustra specifically addresses men and women together. He says, for example, "These things are exactly true, women, exactly men," indicating that men and women at the same time were present in his audiences and were his followers, which is corroborated in the younger Avestan Farvardin Yasht, which identifies the name of both men and women disciples of Zarathustra. And he advises his youngest daughter, Poruchista, "Do thou persevere, Poruchista. To thee he shall grant the firm foundation of good thinking, of truth, and of wisdom." To Zarathustra, good thinking, truth, wisdom are qualities that the divine personifies, which he thought a woman capable of attaining. According to tradition, this last gatha was composed for his daughter's wedding. In those days, many brides and grooms got married at one time, and Zarathustra gives some advice to those brides and grooms who were getting married on that day on how they should treat each other for a successful married life. He does not tell the brides to be obedient to their husbands. He says instead, "Let each of you try to win the other with truth, Asha, and this will be of good gain for each," expressing the notion that the marriage relationship is one of partnership, with each spouse having to make the same effort to win the love and respect of the other, with all the values that comprise Asha, the true, correct order of existence, which in the Gathas includes the truths of mind, heart, and spirit, qualities such as goodness, what's right, honesty, generosity, friendship, loving kindness, compassion, being just, as in being fair. But this advice applies not only to the relationship between husband and wife, it applies to all our relationships. If each of us would try to win others with all these good qualities that are implicit in the true good order of existence, it would solve the problems that plague our societies. Of course, we should use common sense in protecting ourselves from those who are not well-intentioned. But a later text tells us that even to enemies, we should be just, as in being fair. In the Ashirwad portion of the Zoroastrian wedding ceremony, the priest gives advice to couples who were getting married on how to live their lives and treat other people in accordance with the teachings of the religion. And one of these bits of advice says, "To your enemies, be just." Think about that for a moment. If we are required to be just, fair, even to our enemies, how much more should we be just to all living things, regardless of whether they are members of our family, our community, friends, strangers, people of different cultures, different nations, and other life forms. But as valuable as justice is, Zarathustra requires that we go a step further. He requires that we give a hand up. He describes a person who makes the right choices not as just, not even as righteous. He says, "The beneficent have correctly chosen." Beneficence means a bountiful generosity that springs from active goodness, loving kindness, care, concern. We all have power. In the concept of good rule, Vahukshatra, power is a trust to be used for the benefit of everyone, all the living, our world. It goes a step beyond social justice. A very late Avestan text, written, in fact, not one of my favorite texts, but in this respect it's good. It was written after Avestan times and recounts an ancient legend which states that the Lord Wisdom asked the legendary figure Yima, later called Jamshid, to be the teacher of his law. But Yima said no. He didn't want to be a preacher, nor was he taught to be one. Did the Lord Wisdom hurl a thunderbolt at him or otherwise punish him for his disobedience and independence? Not at all. He not only respected Yima's freedom to choose, he offered him another way of doing good. This text has the Lord Wisdom supposedly saying, "Then I, Ahura Mazda, said thus unto him, since thou wantest not to be the preacher and the bearer of my law, then make thou my world thrive, make my world increase, undertake thou to nourish, to rule, and to watch over my world." This makes it clear that a good ruler should rule for the benefit of the ruled, not for his own aggrandizement, not by ignoring their needs or marginalizing them or exploiting them or being untruthful with them. In fact, in the Avestan Zamyad Yasht, we are told that when Yima, Jamshid, became arrogant and turned to lies, the kingly divine glory, his authority to rule, left him. If we can reclaim this teaching of generosity, of loving kindness, of nurturing each other, being fair, make it an active part of our lives, what a force for good we could be. An intelligent generosity to those who are disadvantaged enables equal opportunity. And equal opportunity is one of the foundations of social justice. So too is the freedom to speak. But let's be clear about one thing. Even in law, the freedom to speak has never included the freedom to lie. As the late Mr. Justice Holmes once wrote, no one has the freedom to falsely cry fire in a theater. Our freedoms include corresponding responsibilities to others. All of the values we cherish, the freedom to think, speak, make choices, values such as justice, truth, generosity, goodness, loving kindness, friendship, compassion, all of these values are implicit in the notion of Asha, the true, correct, good order of existence. These are not things we can take for granted. These are qualities we have to create, recreate, give substance to over and over with our choices in thought, word, and action, as long as we have life. Because if we don't, we lose them. They cease to have reality in our societies, in our lives, in our beings. It's that simple. In Avestan texts other than the Gathas, we see many instances of gender equality. The Yasna Haftan Haiti says, "May a good ruler, man or woman, thus assume rule over us." This prayer takes for granted that women could be good rulers, so the history of those times must have included good women rulers. This gender equality extended even to rituals and the priesthood. Here are just in the Arpatistan and Nilangistan, translated by Saurabh J. Balsara and published by the Bombay Parsi Panchayat Funds and Properties Trust in 1915. This was an administrative text written for the guidance of the priesthood. So it likely represented the dominant views of the religious establishment of that time, which included having women priests. Here are just two examples. the author states that women priests are deemed fit for the guardianship of even the highest fires, quote, even where the Varharan fire, later called the Atash Vaharan, is enthroned. And it states that whenever priestly duties require a priest to travel, as between two priests who are married to each other, if both have control over property and can manage wealth, then either one may travel to perform priestly duties. And surprisingly, it states that if only the woman priest has control over property and can manage wealth, then her husband should travel to perform priestly duties, indicating not only that women were priests, but that women had independent control over property even after marriage, which has since been confirmed by archaeological evidence. In the early 1900s, forgive the traffic noises, I'm sorry about that. In the early 1900s, an archaeological dig in Persepolis discovered hundreds of clay tablets. The discovery of these tablets must have come as quite a shock to that generation of archaeologists who in the early 1900s themselves had no conception of gender equality as we understand it. These scholars also believed that the Achaemenian kings used slave labor. But these tablets include numerous, meticulous payroll records, which show that the workers who built Persepolis were paid employees, not slaves, and that the numbers of male and female workers were well balanced. Women were employed as both workers and supervisors. They received the same rate of pay in wine, beer, grain, and silver as their male colleagues. Even today, we have not gone to the point of receiving the same rate of pay. And these tablets show that women enjoyed economic independence even after marriage. They owned large estates and properties throughout the empire, disposed of their rents and income, engaged in their own grain and wine businesses, employed workforces, and paid taxes. They had their own personal seals under which they issued orders to their own stewards, and they participated in the social life of the court. Even after the fall of the Achaemenid Empire, this ancient tradition of gender equality did not entirely disappear in outlying areas, at least for a few centuries. Moulton writes of a foreign diplomat, Chang Qian, who in 128 BCE described certain communities in Khorasan and Bactria as follows, quote, "There is no supreme ruler, each city and town electing its own chief. They pay great deference to their women, the husbands being guided by them in their decisions." Ancient Iranian legends described in the Shahnameh speak of women warriors. Banu Goshas, the eldest daughter of the hero Rustam, was a warrior. So also was Gordafrid, the daughter of a garrison commander, who is described as unrivaled in the arts of warfare. When Sohrab laid siege to their castle, she challenged him to single combat, during which the tip of his lance caught her helmet and her long hair streamed out as she rode, which, according to Ferdowsi, caused Sohrab to wonder in astonishment, "If the women of Iran are so valiant, what must their men be like?" Not exactly a statement of gender equality, but at least giving credit where due. These legendary stories of women warriors are factually echoed in the Cambridge History of Iran, which mentions that the women warriors of a Persian satrap were introduced to Alexander at a banquet. The Greeks were shocked. The women in their families were not permitted even to attend private feasts, let alone fight as warriors. In that time period, gender equality was not a part of Greek culture. Yet it is ironic, is it not, that for many generations, the academicians of our times have considered the ancient Greeks to be the founders of democratic values and freedoms, and the ancient Persian culture to be devoid of these qualities. Both the Achaemenian kings were not elected rulers, unlike the early Median kings and Iranian tribal traditions. And Xerxes did his utmost to conquer the independent Greek states, depriving them of their freedom to choose entirely, which may have influenced these academic opinions. But here, let us take a moment to remember something important. It is one thing to look at history with an impartial eye, hopefully impartial. It is another thing entirely to keep alive ancient ancestral grudges against anyone or any peoples today. Zarathustra teaches individual responsibility. Each person is responsible for his own choices. So we should not condemn or feel hostility towards anyone today for what their ancestors may have done. Unfortunately, after the destruction of the Achaemenid Empire, and even more so after the Arab invasion of Iran and the migration of many Zoroastrians to India, gender equality took a hard hit in Zoroastrian thought in both Iran and India. Yet many Zoroastrians, even those who themselves were denied social justice and equality, did indeed continue to extend truthfulness and generosity to others. This brings us to an interesting question. Does gender affect Zarathustra's perception of the divine? We will discuss his perception of the divine in 2 future sessions because they are among his most beautiful and unusual ideas, largely forgotten under the influence of other religious paradigms. So here I will address only how gender does or does not come into it. In Avestan, as in Spanish and French, all nouns have gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter. But unless the meaning of a noun is intrinsically male, like son, or intrinsically female, like daughter, the genders of nouns are purely grammatical. They have no other function. Now you may object that Ahura, Lord, is an intrinsically masculine noun. But in Zarathustra's time period, since both men and women could be rulers, the concept of lordship would have had to apply to both men and women. Just as more than 300 years ago, Queen Elizabeth I in England was sometimes called the Lord of her subjects. And in the Gathas, Zarathustra uses Lord repeatedly in a rather lovely way, to which gender is not relevant. He uses Ahura as one who has lordship over the qualities that make a being divine, which, as we have seen, Zarathustra thought his daughter capable of attaining. He speaks of the divine as, quote, the very wise master, Ahura, Lord of good thinking, Lord of the word and deed stemming from good Manu. Thou art the Lord by reason of thy tongue, which is in harmony with truth, and by reason of thy words stemming from good thinking. Wisdom in rule is Lord through Aramaiti. We will get into the meanings of Manu and Aramaiti in the next session. Now it is true that in the Gathas, the divine is called the father of truth, good thinking, and Aramaiti, a father who is said to have birthed existence, but fathers don't give birth. So I think Zarathustra here deliberately used father and birthed together to ensure that his listeners understood that these words were being used allegorically to express the idea of a creation by emanation. Now in Avestan, as in English, even intrinsically masculine nouns like man sometimes are used generically to include all sexes. For example, in English, we have mankind, the generic use of man, which includes all humans. In the Gathas, the word nar, man, is also used generically to include all sexes. For example, Zarathustra says, reflect with a clear mind man by man for himself. Here we know that man by man is generic because we have seen that he specifically includes both men and women as practitioners of his teachings. Zarathustra also uses masculine pronouns for the divine, but in Avestan, as in English, masculine pronouns also are used generically. If Zarathustra specifically wanted a pronoun for the divine that would have universal application, the generic masculine would have been the only option available to him in the language of his culture. Gender is a function of our physical shells. If, as the Gathas and later texts imply, the divine is a part of all that exists, that would include the physical and all genders. But the divine is not limited to the physical. It transcends the physical. Gender is irrelevant to the divine. Now I will get to your questions if I can ever figure out the chat feature. Let's see. There we go. Whoa, lots of questions. Okay. What is my email? Good question. I'll give it to everyone in case you want a copy of the talk with all the quotations. My email is Dina, my name, DINAMCI77@gmail.com. Can you give the Gatha translation book from Yale, please? Well, it's out of print. It's called The Gathas of Zarathustra, and it's part of a series called Acta Iranica, published by Brill, E.J. Brill in Leiden. And this particular volume, volume 1, is The Gathas of Zarathustra, in which Insa's translation is given. I'm sorry I can't give you a better reference because it is out of print and you may have a hard time. You might be able to find it on the secondhand book market. So I leave it up to you. The sound of shuffling paper is coming through. That's me with all this stuff. I'm sorry about that. I'll try to do better. The moderator should